Shortly after 6 p.m. on January 30th, 2010, coldest night of the year, Officer Gerald Veneziano left his home and was driving to Fairfield Police Headquarters to report for his overnight duty shift, as he had done hundreds of times before. Little did he know that the events were about to transpire that evening would ultimately change the course of his life and impact an entire community. While traveling on Route 3, for reasons that remain a mystery even today, Officer Veneziano began to be followed without provocation by an aggressive driver. The stalking continued for well over 10 miles. Now in Fairfield, Veneziano contacted an on-duty officer via cell phone in an attempt to have his individual stopped. Unfortunately, all Fairfield officers were busy with other emergency calls that required their attention, namely a working fire and a person almost across the street who was dying from a heart problem. As Veneziano pulled into the parking lot of the municipal complex, the stalker pulled into his unlit adjacent parking lot. Believing this individual posed a threat to the public and desires to obtain this person's identification for possible issuance of a summons, Veneziano drove to the stalker's parking lot. With complete disregard to his own personal safety and not knowing that backup would not be immediately available, Veneziano pulled up to the suspect and identified himself as a police officer. When Veneziano asked the driver what he was doing, the driver, with a blank stare on his face, pulled out a handgun and fired at the officer. The first shot struck Veneziano in the mouth area. Although severely wounded and in shock, Veneziano's police training and experience took over. The officer sought cover and refuge outside of his vehicle. Unfortunately, Veneziano's vehicle was still in gear and it rolled away, leaving him fully exposed. As Veneziano crawled away, the gunman fired his weapon repeatedly, striking the officer 8 times in the chest, arm, and leg. With multiple gunshot wounds and bleeding profusely, Veneziano returned fire, but the gunman fled the scene. Knowing that his life depended upon being found, Officer Veneziano somehow found the inner strength to crawl to the street. He was initially aided by a passing motorist and then by a variety of first responders. At the scene, Veneziano was able to provide vital intelligence about the shooter and his vehicle, which would later prove invaluable to investigators. The gunman was eventually apprehended and charged with this heinous crime. Officer Veneziano is here with us today due to a series of events that can be categorized as nothing short of miraculous. First of all, the officer was in excellent shape, both physically and mentally, at the time of his shooting. Next, Fairfield Officer Jeffrey Ditter was on the desk at the time of the incident and calmly navigated the chaotic elements needed to render assistance to the officer. Other Fairfield police officers who were mitigating another medical emergency were able to immediately respond to the scene, providing first aid. West Caldwell police officer Michael Laura, a 2-time combat veteran in Iraq, who was experienced in combat wounds and applied a solution known as Quick Clot, which always carried with Veneziano. Finally, Officer Veneziano was airlifted to University Hospital by the State Police helicopter, where our most distinguished trauma surgeons happened to be filling in for the doctor. Officer Veneziano is one tough bird. He was determined not only to survive, but also to thrive. He underwent many long and arduous operations and painful recovery procedures. He is now back on the job and is a role model for all law enforcement officers. Throughout this entire event and its ensuing recovery ordeal, Officer Veneziano demonstrated tremendous bravery and outstanding professionalism. 200 Club is proud to present the Valor Award to Officer Gerald Veneziano.